Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So, sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Welcome back. In this episode, I'll talk about how to find if a fraudulent payment happened in December during the busy year end. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 320. 3 ways to find a missed fraudulent payment made in December. Now, I always like to have this episode or episode that talks about this subject the first week in January, where everyone's back and everything is back to normal as far as the work hours. Now, I will tell you, I know the AP or the vendor team hasn't really gone anywhere. You might have had a smaller staff over the New Year holiday after your year end closed. But I know you were staffed, and I know that because a lot of you always contact me during that type of, if you want to call it downtime. So I know a lot of you worked, maybe some of you were off, but in any event, now everyone is back in the office, not just AP or not just the vendor team, and the hours are back to normal. So this is the perfect time to start looking at whether or not a fraudulent payment was made during, right, that busy year end in December. And I say that again because every year I usually get a lot of calls. Actually, I get the most calls of the year in January that talk about having found a fraudulent payment in December. Again, right, it's chaotic, can be chaotic depending on your company, and it can be busy, and fraudsters know that. And so they particularly focus on sending those fraudulent emails to try to get the AP or vendor team to change vendor master file records for diverting payments, like changing banking or changing a remittance address to reroute check payments. So fraudsters are doing that too, but they really focus on that at year end because they know that everybody's busy. And so in January, they usually find out, right? The teams will find out either because, or actually, for the majority of them, they find out because the vendors are now following up on payments because they're back in the office too that were not received. And lo and behold, you tell them that you actually did make the payment. And so the whole process starts. And I usually get a call or an email to provide training, provide advice on how to avoid fraudulent payments going forward. And so now, though, I want to make sure, and I always try to again have this the first week of January to talk about how you can find that fraudulent payment so you don't have to wait for the vendor to tell you. Many times the vendor does not follow up and does not find that they don't have the payment made until much later. And it's much better for you, especially if you recently made the payment, like towards the end of December. You might still be able to recover some of those funds back from your bank. It's all about the timing and when you find out that there was a fraudulent payment. So, since December or year end is a popular time for fraudsters to focus on sending fraudulent requests to change banking, to change remittance addresses, to divert ACH payments, to divert check payments, this is the perfect time to try to find out as soon as possible. And I actually have 3 ways that you can do that. Now, you might have more ways, right? There may be other things that you're doing to detect fraud. And so, by no means do you abandon those, do those as well. But check these 3 out. And if there's one or all that you want to add, right, to your strategies, feel free to do that too. Now, the first one is actually something that we all know we should be doing. And I will tell you that when I was a practitioner, it was hard to get the vendor statements done if you didn't have some type of an automated process. But vendor statements is the first one because if you compare the vendor statements, what they show as outstanding versus what you show as outstanding, that can be an indicator of fraud for any invoices that you show that are paid that the vendor has not recorded as paid. Now, it could just be a timing issue, especially if it's a more recent payment. But if it's not a timing issue, then it could definitely be fraud. So that's the first thing. The first way. The second way is a bank reconciliation. This is also something that's not new. It's been best practice for a while now to do a daily bank reconciliation so you can find right? Those fraudulent payments, those duplicate payments. And so a bank reconciliation is a great way to just make sure that the payments went through. And then if there are any discrepancies, it's a great way to follow up. So that really combined with your vendor statements can make a great way to detect fraud. The second way, or the third way and final way, is a way that if you've listened to my podcast in the past, I know I've said it before. I don't know exactly on which podcast, but this is a technique that I actually introduced. And I introduced it because I did some work with a client and they were doing it and thought it was great. And it was calling your vendors that have, large payments. So, one of the ways that I recommend that after the payment has gone out. So, when the payment has gone out, if that payment is over a certain amount of money, like I don't know, if you have most of your payments like under a certain threshold, and then all of a sudden you have a very large payment, maybe you have a construction project going on and you made a payment worth millions of dollars, right? Or I actually just tell my clients use whatever threshold you can afford to, you can't afford to lose. And I have some clients that will use 300,000, some 150,000. I had one that was 5,000. I actually had one that was $0 because they said they couldn't afford to lose anything. But run a report of all the vendors that had payments over a certain amount and just call them and make sure they received it. I bet many of those vendors, you will have that will be their validation that they received the payment, or that'll be your validation that they received the payment because maybe they haven't checked yet, or maybe their system is automated, right? And it won't come up anyway because it has been recorded as being paid. But now you can rest assured that the payment actually did get to the vendor. The key though is when the payment did not get to the vendor, and that is key because one, you have found out before the vendor has. and you are more than likely letting the vendor know that it's been fraud. And so now uh, you have found out ahead of when the vendor would have told you, which means now you can go to your bank and you may still be within their threshold to recover the funds. So that's good for you, right? That you didn't have to wait until the vendor noticed that the payment was not made to learn that there has been a fraud, because it could have been too late to get it back from the bank. But two, it's good for the vendor too, because maybe they did not know that they were the victims of fraud, because many times the fraudsters, right, they just won't stop at one of your vendor's clients like you. They will actually go to multiple clients and reroute those vendors' payments. So that vendor, right, may not have known that not only did they ask you to make a change to divert the payment, but they also asked some of their other clients to do the same thing. And so it's great to notify the vendor so now they know and they can spring into action. All right. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 320th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.